carnations.
Sure.
One desires so much more than that. The day itself is simplified. A bowl of white, cold, a cold porcelain, low and round, with nothing more than the carnations there. Two, say even that this complete simplicity stripped one of all one's torments, concealed the evilly compounded vital I, and made it fresh in a world of white, a world of clear water, brilliant edged. Still, one would want more, one would need more, more than a world of white and snowy scents. Three, there would still remain the never resting mind, so that one would want to escape, come back to what had been so long composed. The imperfect is our paradise. Note that in this bitterness, delight, since the imperfect is so hot in us, lies in flawed words and stubborn sounds. So it's a really beautiful poem, not that hard to understand, but what's interesting to me is, in a sense, the question where this beauty is to be found. This beauty is something that exists in a bowl of flowers, in, imaginarily speaking, in the poet's room. He's looking at a bowl of flowers, clear water, pink and white carnations, this paradisal beauty, and it's described as, again, cold, kind of like that, not as dire as the cold in the snowman, but cold, absent of passion, absent of turmoil, a newly fallen snow at the end of winter, pink and white carnations. So this kind of aesthetic ideal, pictorially speaking, very, very like a painting. Um, but yet then one desires so much more than that, right? So one desires so much more than this perfection, this stillness, this stasis, this aestheticism. The day itself is simplified, a bowl of white, cold, a cold porcelain. And I see there too the emphasis or the influence of Asian art, this kind of just so-ness of aesthetic beauty. Say even that this complete simplicity stripped one of all one's torments, right? Even if this image could somehow release one from one's torments, conceal the evilly compounded vital I. So I'm not sure if one is being stripped of one's torments or if they're being concealed, and that's a question. Made it fresh in a world of white. Still, one would want more, one would need more. And then the poem turns, right, to praise or accept or affirm the never resting mind, the imperfect bitterness. Note that in this bitterness, delight, since the imperfect is so hot in us, we've gone from cold to hot, from images of snow to images of, creative passion or fire, and images of complexity, um, troubledness, the evilly compounded I, which I think is a really great phrase, lies in flawed words and stubborn sounds. So for this poet, delight is to be found in the act of creating poetry, not in the act of creating kind of ideal static images of beauty, you know. So comments on this poem? I think it's beautiful and it's more it's simpler to understand the argument that's going on here, or let's say the ambivalence or the process that this poem is enacting. I think when we read poetry, it's always so useful to think of the poem. A good poem always enacts a process. It's always like a little voyage. It goes someplace, it gets someplace. It doesn't just say what the poet already knows or thinks. So we start out with this image and I can just imagine Stevens in his room where he spent so much time with his beautiful objects, looking at this bowl of flowers and starting to think about it, seeing the snow outside, and then starting to think about the kind of perfection, the artistic perfection that this image offers. And then, realizing it's like the poem does a turn right there in the middle that we want. In fact, we need bitterness, we need confusion. We need the evilly tormented I, and that becomes the source of our art, not just this aesthetic perfection. So flawed words and stubborn sounds. Yeah. Any questions or any comments on that poem?
Just have a sort of
Excuse, I'm sorry,
Yeah, go do it.
sorry, I could put my little hand down. Um,
I didn't see it. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
okay, so this actually made me think of painting because I could visually imagine that little bowl of carnations, and sometimes I paint still lifes, and they're not perfect, but the act of painting and looking at it hard, really, that it goes through your mind and out your hands, however imperfect the result, means more than just having that perfect little bowl of carnations, which after all might not be there tomorrow anyway. But
Absolutely. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah.
having looked at it and tried, however flawed and stubbornly the paint refuses to look exactly the way you want it to look. It's anyway. So it's just it's a beautiful way of saying the effort in words to capture something.
Yeah.
I think it really matters more, I think, than just having the flowers there.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. Yeah, that's nice. Any other comments?
The Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I'm a little puzzled by the evilly compounded vital I. I mean, being imperfect is one thing. That's not the same as being evil. So is there some personal theology he has about original sin or something that I'm not aware of? Is that what's going on here?
Who knows? Who knows? I mean, Stevens was raised in the Lutheran Church. Excuse me. But Douglas, you're shaking your head. You're mute.
No, I'm agreeing that that's a puzzlement. But he did make a deathbed conversion to Roman Catholicism.
Yeah, he did. Or at least most people think he did. Do you think he did?
Right.
Yeah,
Who
one
knows?
doesn't know for
One
sure.
doesn't know.
It is oft refuted, you know. But I mean, also, Stevens is not a terribly confessional poet, you know. But Stevens was, in some ways, not a happy camper. I mean, anybody who's going around punching people out in Key West, and drinking quite a bit, um, is a pretty complicated person. Um, and we don't necessarily see all of that in his poetry the way we will if we get to somebody like Sharon Olds, or Robert Lowell. Um, but there's some real darkness and some real kind of complexity and difficulty in Stevens's temperament as far as one can tell.
Uh,
The
I had the same reaction, Leslie, to the line "never resting mind." I thought, is that a human mind or is that the mind of God that he's talking about?
Keep in mind.
Human mind.
Well, it looks like it, but it struck a theological note with me that because human mind does rest.
Well, you're always thinking, even if you're asleep.
Not when you're asleep. Not when you're asleep.
Oh,
And you exaggerate
differ.
my activity, and I'm often not thinking.
Well,
As
okay, we can
my
make
wife
this a
will attest.
collective. We can make this a collective statement. Somebody is thinking all the time. If you put
Well,
the words together.
but that's kind of a mystical idea in itself, that thinking is all humanity is engaged in consciousness and thinking. I mean, somebody is
it's happy
all
hour
the time,
somewhere.
like drinking. Exactly, it's drinking is happy hour somewhere.
That's funny.
Anyway, enough of that.
And
Yeah.
the other thing is, I mean, really identifying with what Laurel had to say. Is the two pages later in the collected poems is a study of two pairs,
Which we're going to look at next.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Uh-huh. I really like that poem too. Yeah, Peter, you wanted to say
I
something.
just wanted to say I like this poem a lot, and part of what I like about it is that the pink and white carnations and the clear water and the brilliant bowl are such concrete and attractive images but they're too orderly and they're too peaceful. And couple of pages earlier, not much more than that, is one of the first poems in the book. Poetry is a destructive force, where poetry is symbolized by a violent beast, a lion,
Right.
an ox, a bear.
Yeah.
And it's not as if one poem needs the other, but they are kind of
Simultaneously.
contraries in Blake's sense.
Yeah. True. Yeah, Douglas.
Yeah, just like I've said about I don't know, it was a different poem about how it was afternoon, evening all afternoon. And this one it says a newly fallen snow at the end of winter when afternoons return.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, up in New England, that's really hits home because
Yeah.
it's afternoon all day long a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And,
And never quite night.
it's freaking cold here today.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the one that Douglas mentioned. And by the way, what Peter just mentioned about poetry as a destructive force, when we get to Puella Paruella, we'll see that again. Okay, so study of two pairs. Peter, would you please pronounce the first two words?
I'd say opusculum pedagogum, but I'm not sure
He
that's
said it.
right. It's
He
good.
said it. Opusculum pedagogon. The pairs are not vials, nudes, or bottles. They resemble nothing else. They are yellow forms composed of curves bulging toward the base. They are touched red. They are not flat surfaces having curved outlines. They are round, tapering toward the top. In the way they are molded, there are bits of blue. A hard, dry leaf hangs from the stem. The yellow glistens. It glistens with various yellows, citrons, oranges, and greens flowering over the skin. The shadows of the pears are blobs on the green cloth. The pears are not seen as the observer wills. Yeah, that's a really clever little poem, I think. So that Latin means a little lesson, a little pedagogical lesson. And this reminds me very much of a Cubist painting. In fact, let's go away from screen sharing for a minute. Yeah, thanks. So all the colors, it's a very painterly painting, right? The pears are not vials. They're not, we can't just make them into handy metaphors for something. They resemble nothing else. They are the pairness of pears, the, essence of pairness, right? They are only themselves. So how do we write about them? Well, we look at them closely. They're yellow forms composed of curves bulging toward the base. And then, like Laura would see with her painterly eye, there's red in that yellow. It's like my mom was a painter, and she said long ago when I was little, like people who have never studied painting always think that white people are pink. And if they would paint them, they would paint them pink, and then they would look like boiled lobsters. And she's like, actually, if you look at skin, there's yellow in it, there's green in it, there's gray in it. It's not just pink. So here we're looking closely at these pairs. They're not flat surfaces having curved outlines, which is how you'd have to represent them in a painting, right? Because, a painting is not three-dimensional. They are round, tapering toward the top. And we're like, yeah, we know. Okay. In the way they are modeled, there are bits of blue. And that's really interesting too, that there's also blue and red in that yellow. The way they are modeled, they have body, they have heft, they have shape. A hard, dry leaf hangs from the stem. The yellow glistens. It glistens with various yellows, citrons, oranges, and greens flowering over the skin. This is going to make me want to go look at a pear, you know? Because it's like we have these really simplified ideas about things in nature, what they look like. Oh, yeah, pear is yellow, orange is orange. You look at them, you really look at them. You start seeing the variety and the complexity of their colors, their shapes, their weight, their solidity, the way they exist in time and space. And then we've got the shadows of the pears, blobs on the green cloth. The pears are not seen as the observer wills, which I think is kind of a koan. It's a little bit of a mystery. What does that mean? They're not seen as the observer wills. Well, it means we can't will ourselves to see the pears a certain way. They just are what they are. Beyond our purposes for them or are cliches about them. They exist there in solidity. And once again, we've got language, this little lesson, this little pedagogical lesson about looking, about seeing both the way we tend to oversimplify things and make generalizations about them that can't be borne up once we look closely. And then also, if we do look at them, we see their isness, their existence apart from our designs for them or apart from our interpretations of them, if that kind of makes sense. Yeah, Barry.
This poem reminded me of a drawing class I took one summer at the University of Oregon, where the instructor was sort of saying, don't when you look at something, because what he would do is he would put a whole bunch of furniture in the center of the room and ask us to try to draw it. And it was very complicated, array of all these things stacked on top of each other. He said, don't stop thinking about what it is you're seeing. It's not a chair. Just look at the shapes, the colors, the forms, and try to have them, as Laura was saying, come into your mind and out your hand. But I think that was the same thing here. He's saying, don't just use your understanding of what a pear is. Look at it very carefully, and take away your conscious understanding of it and just see it.
Yeah, that's really nice.
I couldn't help but think of this. This is just straight impressionism. I mean, that's exactly how they paint. And I had a drawing class too, Barry. And what my teacher did was put an image on the board upside down, so you couldn't preconceive what it was supposed to look like, and then you had to draw it. And I was just as bad as that at that as one could possibly be. I mean, it everything came out looking like stick figures, which raised a question for me, and that is, Laurel does watercolor, and Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel and Raphael in the School of Athens. Those are frescoes. And so the idea that you can, the Impressionists dapple things like Seurat. They dapple, they blend colors just to achieve the exact things that Stevens was talking about. But how could you do that in watercolor, and how could you do that in fresco? How did they achieve those things they did in the Sistine Chapel and the Raphael and the School of Athens? How did they achieve that without being able to do the kind of blending that we know the Impressionists do? And maybe Laurel can speak to how you do that in watercolor. I don't get how, you can have layers. Leonardo would have layers of paint, Van Gogh, layers of paint on. You can't do that with a fresco, and you can't do that with watercolor. So how does that work?
Well, you can sort of do that with watercolor, but you have to plan, which is interesting, because you can put darker over lighter, and you can sometimes scrape things out. But I was thinking about this whole business of shapes and forms. So Robert Henry, who is one of School of the Eight artist and noted for his portraits in the early 20th century, and actually my ex-husband's mother studied with him, the one whose or grandmother, sorry, I have her paint, several of her paintings around. But the way he talked, he wrote a book that's considered one of the seminal books about thinking about doing art, and he talks about seeing the big piece of the form, the big picture of the form first, and getting that kind of right, that big perspective. But he the other thing he says is the object, this is a quote from him, the object isn't to make art, it's to be in that wonderful state which makes art inevitable.
Oh, neat.
And so I think that's a little bit what both of these poems are about to me, is it's not what comes out at the end. It's going to be imperfect, okay? It's not going to be a pear. It's not going to be a bowl of carnations, but it's something that it's inevitable if you sit and look at it and pick up the paint, pick up the watercolors, or pick up a pen and do it. It's not so and you have to not start it worried about what is going to come out and worried about whether it's going to be perfect. You just can't do that. And with watercolor, especially, because an awful lot of
Yeah.
watercolor is accident. And the people I know who are brilliant watercolorists, I mean, I've had a couple of teachers who were really, really good. And the thing was, they also threw away about 19 out of 20.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Because
like
you could
photographers,
say, "Oh my
Hollywood
gosh, you did this
photographers.
beautiful painting." Well, it represents something that they finally were happy with. But the whole process of doing, you're still happy even if you do something that isn't very good. Tony will tell you I go out on our hikes and do little watercolors, and um, they make me happy. They,
They make us happy too, Laurel.
Gary?
Oh, Tony, when you mentioned the upside down painting thing, it reminded me of this book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. Some of you, I'm sure you know about it, Laurel. And they have certain tricks in that to get you to sort of skip over the conscious perception thing of, am I drawing something that looks like the thing I'm drawing? And one of the things they do is they suggest that you do a drawing where you don't look at the paper and what you're drawing, but you look at you're trying to copy a drawing, but you're not looking down at the page. You're just sort of trying to follow the lines. And I found that when I did that, it was much better. What I came out with was much better than it wasn't accurate, but it had a kind of an essence to it that when I consciously tried to look down and see if I was following the lines properly, it didn't have. So it's kind of like you're outsmarting your brain
yeah,
to do this.
Leslie?
Well, that's just what I was going to say about that book, Drawing with the Right Side of Your Brain. And also, I think it's the whole thing of trying to get past the concept your brain has made of maybe what Tony would say is the ideal chairness of the thing, or the ideal, in this case, pairness of a pair. What do pairs look like? Just this abstract thing, into forgetting that whole thing and just observing.
Yeah.
And everybody's observation is going to be different. They're
Yeah.
going to see it differently.
so
Yeah, Peter?
anybody have a drawing class with Salvador Grippi at Pomona?
No.
He would have people crumple a piece of paper, brown paper, like a brown paper bag, and draw that.
Huh.
So you wouldn't be constrained by what you imagined it would be.
Uh-huh.
Study of Two Pairs is a fine poem, and I think it's perfectly justified for the purposes of the poem to isolate pairs as visual objects. But at the risk of, insisting on something that's obvious to everybody, it seems to me that what is being left out legitimately is the pear as an organic thing that is the means by which a pear tree makes another pear tree. It rots eventually or is eaten. The seed comes to fruition or doesn't come to fruition, so that it's perfectly justified to take it as a static visual object, but there's also something very important that is being kind of deliberately left out, let's say. So if I think of a D.H. Lawrence poem in Birds, Beasts, and Flowers, he does look at pairs. He was actually a very good amateur painter, but he would never kind of isolate it to that degree.
Brian?
Um, 2 points. The issue of when you look at something, it's colored by your expectations.
Sure.
Stravinsky had great trouble doing proofreading of his published compositions because when the score would show up, he would look at it and he would hear it.
Oh.
And so to do proofreading, he had to turn the score upside down so that it no longer sang at him. And so he could look at it objectively and actually correct the notes that way.
That is
Second
nuts.
point that I was struck about is that there are two pairs. And perhaps there are two because of the obvious pun. but he never makes use of the fact that there are two of them. The implication is that they're different, I
Uh-huh.
think, but that's never developed as an idea. So I think if I was painting pairs, it would be more or it would be more interesting to paint two than one
Yeah,
because you have something to reference. But I was struck by that. It's
yeah,
not a developed idea.
that's interesting.
Wasn't the two pairs the ideal pair, and then the pair that you're seeing with just paying attention to details of color? Isn't that the
Or
two?
the pair that's a pair and the pair that's words, you know. One interesting thing. So I think of Cezanne with the pairs poem, and I think it was C.H. Lawrence who said that Cezanne rolled the stone away from the tomb by returning things to their actual fleshly, beautiful solidity, rather than some kind of idealized or loathed reality,
Well,
just
that was the transition from Byzantine painting, which was all idealized, into the Renaissance, which people were flesh and blood, to the Impressionists who wanted to capture what they actually saw rather than what they thought they saw.
right,
And that was the whole point of Impressionism.
right. Right.
Yeah.
So let's go back to screen sharing and move on a little bit since this is our last Wallace Stevens Day. This is pretty interesting, all you artistic people. I'll just also say Williams said, with regard to what Laurel was saying, the dream is in pursuit, which is to say what? It's not that you're gonna end up with the perfect thing, but it's a way of living. It's a way of being engaged in process. We're gonna skip The Man on the Dump because it's a really complicated poem and it would take the whole rest of our time. So let's look at On the Road Home. Again, a pretty simple, really beautiful poem. On the road home, it was when I said, there's no such thing as the truth, that the grapes seemed fatter. Scroll down, Tony. The fox ran out of his hole. You, you said, there are many truths, but they are not parts of a truth. Then the tree at night began to change, smoking through green and smoking blue. We were two figures in a wood. We said we stood alone. It was when I said, words are not forms of a single word. In the sum of the parts, there are only the parts. The world must be measured by I. It was when you said, the idols have seen lots of poverty, snakes and gold and lice, but not the truth. It was at that time that the silence was largest and longest. The night was roundest. The fragrance of the autumn warmest, closest, and strongest. It's a really beautiful poem. And again, it's just affirming the lack of an overarching whole, the lack of an ideal, the lack of a God, but affirming what's released when we let go of those, what Stevens would say, illusions. So think back to Sunday morning, the you voice, in that case, the she, the female voice is saying, I want some imperishable bliss. And the other voice is arguing back, death is the mother of beauty, is arguing back, and then this beautiful final stanza that's praising the changing and dying things of the world, the berries, the deer, um, and so on. And this is, again, in the form of a dialogue, an I and a you. I think we don't need it all to know who the you is, but here they're both, affirming the same kind of thing. Um, then the trees at night began to change, smoking through green and smoking blue. We were two figures in a wood. I like this. And we said we stood alone. Well, they don't stand alone. They're in the middle of a forest. They stand where the trees are, they stand where the ground is, they stand where the air is, But what they seem to be saying, perhaps consciously, is we stand what naked beneath a sky in which there is no God. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, it was when I said, and then again, words are not forms of a single word. In the sum of the parts, there are only the parts. The world must be measured by eye, which is what we've seen him just doing, measuring the world by eye. And then this beautiful release of the final stanza, the silence was largest and longest, the night was roundest, the fragrance of the autumn warmest, closest, and strongest. Fragrance, of course, smell is the most intimate of our senses because in order to experience it, it literally has to get inside our body. And so it's as if the world literally is entering the body here. You know, the body is breathing in that fragrance of the world. And there's this beautiful kind of opening up at the end. So, in the interest of time, well, if anybody wants to talk about this, it's cool, but otherwise, we can just scroll down a little bit more. Okay, yeah, so this is another of his most famous poems, trying to define what modern poetry needs to do. The poem of the mind in the act of finding what will suffice. It has not always had to find. The scene was set. It repeated what was in the script. Then the theater was changed to something else. Its past was a souvenir. It has to be living to learn the speech of the place. It has to face the men of the time and to meet the women of the time. It has to think about war and it has to find what will suffice. It has to construct a new stage. It has to be on that stage and, like an insatiable actor, slowly and with meditation, speak words that in the ear, in the delicatest ear of the mind, repeat exactly that which it wants to hear, at the sound of which an invisible audience listens, not to the play, but to itself, expressed in an emotion as of two people, as of two emotions becoming one. The actor is a metaphysician in the dark, twanging an instrument, twanging a wiry string that gives sounds passing through sudden rightnesses, wholly containing the mind, below which it cannot descend, beyond which it has no will to rise. It must be the finding of a satisfaction. It may be of a man skating, a woman dancing, a woman combing, the poem of the act of the mind. So let's briefly go out from screen sharing and talk about this a little bit. Excuse me. And I just wonder what people are noticing about this poem. Anything? Well, he's having, yeah, Eric, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think he's talking about um, finding a new form of poetry, finding a new way of expressing something. He's saying that the old way with a state where everything was already set and all you had to do was work within that form no longer works. We have to invent a new stage, and we have to, you know, he has to, as a modern poet, invent a new way of expressing his emotions and feelings that has that immediacy of an actor on a stage. And it seems, I mean, a lot of this whole group of poems, he seems to be coming back to ruminating about what is poetry and what is he attempting to do. But I thought this was a very, very effective expression of that need to invent a new language, a new stage on which to communicate.
Yeah, absolutely. The stage was set, both formally, it's like in let's say the Renaissance, people could write sonnets, they could write blank verse, they could write, certain set forms. Okay. And then later, rondeau, villanelles, sestinas, and so on. Sestinas are earlier. But now this is blank verse. This is sometimes um, free verse, you know, with different line lengths, um, mostly unrhyming. So formally, the poet is inventing new forms as he or she goes along, but also as far as what can be discovered, what can be, like chosen or believed in. The poet's job is to tease that out, to follow the process of discovering it. So the poem of the mind in the act of finding what will suffice, and then the poem of the act of the mind, you know? I'm not sure that Stevens is so good at learning the speech of the place. That is, I think of Williams more than Stevens as far as speaking the speech of the place. You know, I don't ordinarily see people walking around Oxford, Mississippi sounding like Wallace Stevens. Um, but he has to think about war. This is a poem written in the middle of World War II. And I just was reading an article that argues that Stevens does take an interest in politics, does write about war and so on. This is less evident than, is sometimes thought, but it's there, okay? It has to face the men of the time, meet the women of the time. And then it gets pretty fancy here. It has to be on the stage, speak words that in the ear, the delicatest ear of the mind. That's a very Stevens like locution, repeat what it wants to hear. Um, it must be the finding of a satisfaction. So the poem has a big job to do. Yeah, Leslie.
That's the part of the poem that that I really noticed the most, is this idea that the poet has to find the right words that this imagined invisible audience is going to take in as being, is going to listen not to the play, but to itself expressed in an emotion as of two people, as of two emotions becoming one. So it seems like the poet's job is to find just the right words that are going to resonate in such a way that the person who's hearing the poem will will take his view, the poet's view, and the hearer's view, and merge them into one, so that the emotion, because he's been talking mind, 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 mind all this time, but this is the emotion will become one.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. So it's like a wedding, It's a kind of marriage between the reader and the poet, in which two beings join to become one through the act of artistic creation. Yeah, that's nice. Other comments? Julia, weigh in. She's so quiet.
I found myself thinking about Nabokov in the when he describes the ideal, his ideal reader is that he's climbing a mountain, and then up at the top he encounters this other person who happened to be climbing the same mountain. And so it's not, I was contrasting in my mind that Nabokov was, there was maybe one worthy being out there in his mind, whereas Stephen seems to be wanting to create the work that's going to meet many others. I
Yeah,
don't.
that's nice. That's nice. That's great. Other comments on this poem? What I think is most important about this poem is the emphasis on process, the emphasis on finding, and that we've been talking about that, the creative process takes us to not the truth, but the, which is the very famous last sentence fragment of The Man on the Dump. What is it we're looking for when we say aptest Eve, when we say stanza my stone, and then the poem ends with the, whatever that might be. That's a great tease. Like you can really stop and think about that. Yeah, Barry.
It's interesting that he uses the phrase will suffice, that which will suffice. He's not after perfection. He's after something that is sufficient. It gets the job done that he has to do.
Yeah.
It's sort of not, it's sort of anti-Platonist in a way. There isn't any perfect pair. There isn't any perfect truth. It's just what will suffice.
Yeah, that's nice. Of course, also, what will suffice means what will feed you, you know? Yeah,
Uh,
that's
I have to defend Plato here, Barry. The only way you would know it's not perfect is if you had something in your mind that was perfect.
Mm.
You couldn't hold it to a standard
Yeah.
unless you had a standard, or you couldn't say it falls short of being the standard unless you knew what that standard was somehow in your mind. Plato doesn't think you achieved perfection. That's not what he says. Anyway, I
So,
had to pipe up, you know.
Yeah.
So
But,
okay,
it's it. Oh, I'm sorry.
sorry.
oh,
Go ahead,
Neil,
Leslie.
it's okay.
No, the only thing it's interesting to me in the very end, he sort of picks these random images about
Yeah.
satisfaction. I mean, it's sort of a man skating, a woman dancing, a woman combing. And it's sort of, it's like there's this sort of put there.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't, I mean, we can visualize them, but it's sort of like I'm having trouble putting that in the context here. Is, am I wrong here? It's just, it was odd for when we got to those.
Well, those are very famous art subjects. I mean, I can see the paintings for all three of them
Oh, that's true.
in a way. Um,
That's
the
true.
Yeah, I was just going to say back to the man at the dump, since we're not reading it. When I was reading the part about where was it one first heard of the truth, I was thinking, well, maybe definite and indefinite articles are meaning the ideal and the particulate, because if you say this is the apple,
Uh-huh.
the pear, it's one thing. If it's an apple, or
Yeah.
that's different. So
Yeah.
that's what he was talking about, because he's talking about not hearing a truth, but the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
And the
cool.
answer probably is one first heard of the truth, as with a capital T, in church.
Yeah. Yeah, as a little kid. Yeah. Yeah. But also, so the man skating and the woman dancing and so on. I mean, yeah, they are subjects of paintings, but they're also, I like the randomness of them. You know, one of my favorite new words is rando. And I like it that they just are things that occur to the poet at that point in the poem, put them down and they can't necessarily be kind of solved, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because they're the only concrete
Yeah, they
images.
are.
They're the only concrete images here. So,
Yep.
but you're right. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, we do have the musician twanging a wiry string. That's kind of halfway concrete, the metaphysician,
Bill and I are in the car. I'm not sure you can hear
Yeah,
us.
we can hear you. Speak loud.
Oh, hi. Hi, everybody. I just was thinking a little bit back to the word suffice, and fire and ice, that
Uh-huh.
poem about the world ending, and some say fire, but ice is also great and will suffice.
Yeah,
It's like those examples might seem random, but they'll suffice.
yeah,
Anything at that point will suffice because the the poet is just choosing an image.
yeah,
That's all. That's how I saw it.
yeah, yeah. That's great. Thank you. Okay, so let's go back to our, excuse me, Tony, I'm sorry to keep blipping you back and forth, but back to screen share we go.
Not a problem.
Okay, so we're zooming down. Oh, you know what? I just want to look quickly at the first two stanzas of God is Good, It is a Beautiful Night, because I think that I don't need to read the whole poem, but I think the first two stanzas are just magic. And I love the title, God is Good, It is a Beautiful Night. Look around, brown moon, brown bird, as you rise to fly. Look round at the head and zither on the ground. Look round you as you start to rise, brown moon, at the book and shoe, the rotted rose at the door. I just think this is absolutely gorgeous. This is magical. And I don't even want to talk about the poem. It's obviously another poem about poetry. The moon, the ancient symbol of poetry, the imagination, the feminine, you know, in you, the light is, the head is speaking. So another poem about this kind of being transported, um, into this magical place where creativity happens. But for some reason, the first two stanzas of that are just completely magic to me. Look around, brown moon, brown bird, as you rise to fly. Like, wow. I don't know. There's a kind of daring in being able to write like that because it's so irrational. Do you know what I mean?
Irrational.
No, irrational, but irrational too. It's not whatever. Let's move on. Peter and I can argue about it just
No, irrational is not a bad word.
I
That's
know.
that's what I'm trying to
I know.
say.
And I want to go down to Puella Parula, which is another of my favorite poems. And this is a late poem. It's from the Auroras of Autumn. By the way, on Facebook, everybody I know is posting amazing pictures of Aurora Borealis right now. It's like I've never seen it, and I probably never will, but I love seeing the pictures on Facebook. It kills me. Puella Parula. Every thread of summer is at last unwoven. By one caterpillar is great Africa devoured, and Gibraltar is dissolved like spit in the wind. But over the wind, over the legends of its roaring, the elephant on the roof and its elephantine blaring, the bloody lion in the yard at night or ready to spring from the clouds in the midst of trembling trees, making a great gnashing over the water wallows of a vacant sea, declaiming with wide throat. Over all these, the mighty imagination triumphs like a trumpet and says, in this season of memory, when the leaves fall like things mournful of the past, keep quiet in the heart, oh wild bitch. Oh mind gone wild, be what he tells you to be, Puella. Write pox across the window pane, and then be still. The Sumerium in excelsis begins, flame, sound, fury composed. Hear what he says, the dauntless master, as he starts the human tale. This is a really apocalyptic poem, right? Peter mentioned earlier these images of violence, poetry, the violence of poetry, but here we've got these images. I mean, this seems to me to be a pretty appropriate poem for right now, historically speaking. Things are really getting unwound. Things are really coming to chaos. Every thread of summer is at last unwoven. Does that mean, fall is coming, winter is coming? Or does it mean the continents are being undone somehow by one caterpillar is great Africa devoured and Gibraltar is dissolved like spit in the wind? So I mean I love this poem and it just seems to me to be like the end of things, the end of time, um, the devolution, the unwinding, the unspinning of creation over the wind, over the legends of its roaring, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Over all these, the mighty imagination triumphs. And this is Stevens's great theme. Triumphs like a trumpet and says in this season of memory. So this is also a man who's, you know, nearing death, um, looking back when the leaves fall like things mournful of the past, and telling the heart to be still. Keep quiet in the heart, oh wild bitch. That's very un-Stevensian language, oh wild bitch. I think it's really beautiful right here. The heart is a wild bitch. The heart won't be quiet. The heart wants things. The heart won't shut up. The heart is wild. Oh, mind gone wild, be what he tells you to be, little girl. So you think about, I mean, Stevens is essentialist in his use of male and female, but here again, the little girl is the imagination. The little girl is the female, obviously. Write pox, write peace across the window pane, and then be still. So the poet in this moment has said his final say, pox. And then, the final glorious summation begins: flame, sound, fury composed. Hear what he says, the dauntless master, as he starts the human tale. Who's that dauntless master? Is that God? Is that the poet? Is that the poet every time he starts the human tale? Is the poet the same as the dauntless master and the puella? You know? But I think I love the kind of gorgeous violence of this poem and the kind of tragic acceptance of this poem. Um, the mournfulness, leaves falling like things of mournful of the past, and then this admonishment to the heart to be still, to be the little girl, to write peace on the window pane. There's a great poem or a play by Yeats called The Words Upon the Window Pane, which is about Swift's madness, The Words Upon the Window Pane. This reminds me of it a little bit. So, comments on this poem?
Well, I thought it was interesting that he's writing pox on the window pane. So outside the window are all these things going on in Africa and in Gibraltar, and things that are disturbing and violent and so on. But his job as a poet is to write pox on the window pane so that he can do his work, uh, you know, without without letting those troubling images outside the window stop his creative imagination.
Yeah, that's good. This reminds me too of Prospero in The Tempest, because you've got all this violence and chaos outside, and then you've got the turmoil of the artist inside, and the act of disciplining that turmoil, disciplining that self. Um, yeah.
Well, and of course, writing packs on the window pane is only makes sense on the inside.
Mhm.
Because from the outside, the chaos in the outside doesn't can't even translate. That's, because
Uh-huh.
it doesn't read right. But on the inside, you know, this is when you look at that window, don't look out, bring the piece into you. I think that's kind of where it's going.
Yeah, uh-huh. It reminds me of you guys following the Buddhist monks that are marching right now, the March for Peace. Do y'all know about that? I mean, that is so amazing. That is so amazing, And it reminds me of that, the discipline. But also, um, the artist is not just turning away from the chaos of what's going outside. He's not saying, I'm not going to look. Do you know what I mean? He's saying, let it begin. Let this Sumerium in excelsis begin. And the artist somehow is going to begin again writing the human tale, which is going to have to, um, the human tale is not in avoidance of reality. It's just that he is finding a way to, um, in a sense, quiet the self sufficiently, accept that enough so that he can, write that human tale. Because the human tale is definitely a tale of chaos and confusion.
Tell me what the title means.
Little girl,
Little?
little girl.
Okay.
It's about the only Latin I know. Puella, parula.
And the adjective parva means little, so it's a diminutive added to an adjective which already means little.
What
So the little
language?
tiny girl. Yeah,
What
yeah.
language?
Latin.
Oh, Latin.
Yeah, so he's using some Latin in here. So any final comments on Wallace Stevens? Yes, no, up, down. Douglas, how about you?
Well, he's always been a favorite of mine. But reading him with the thinking about the class has really broadened my appreciation of him. Because before I would just, I just loved the poetry
Yeah,
without analyzing it.
yeah. I mean, his sounds are just amazing, you know. His sounds are just a pleasure. It's like eating brownies or something. It's like yum, amazing ear. And I love all the color words. I mean, when I was a kid, 64 box of crayons was the best, and I would read all the color words of Viridian and magenta and all those things and whatever. And Stevens has that kind of eye and that kind of just kind of delicious passion for color words. Um, yeah, he's a beautiful poet. And I do recommend if you can't watch the Voices and Visions film, it's an hour long, it's a documentary about Stevens, primarily featuring Harold Bloom. But there's like this really beautiful um sequence that I remember about auroras of autumn, which is really pretty magical. I don't know the long poems that well. I've read them, but I don't go back to them like, an ordinary evening in New Haven and stuff like that, or The Rock. But it's all those voices and visions poems or films are pretty cool. Some of them more than others, but very educational. Other final comments on
Well,
Steve?
one other thing I was going to say is uh, there. I don't know about last night. There were tremendous auroras. I guess. Unfortunately,
Oh,
I missed them. But tonight it might also happen. So
not in Mississippi.
one never knows.
You
They
can
went
see
as
them,
far south
Aurora.
as Cuba at one point.
Yeah.
You
I
can
know.
see them,
I
Doug.
have friends who saw them here a year ago or so, but not me. I was in Alaska at a writing retreat, and everybody else there saw auroras, and I slept through them. And then every night after that, I woke up once an hour and staggered to the window, and there were never any auroras. So this is my fate. I was also the slowest to see a moose, whatever.
But you did see
I did
several
see a moose.
moose.
I did. Yeah.
We had auroras here, I don't know, maybe last year, but they were only visible to a camera. Take a picture and they would
Only
show
visible what?
you
Yeah,
had
we
to
saw
take
those.
a picture with the camera and you could
Oh,
capture
yeah, yeah,
a very faint pink image, but they're supposed to be out there, but we have so much fog,
yeah,
you can't really see across the street at night. So
yeah.
the
Yeah.
sky.
Yeah, I even tried that. I tried with my camera taking a picture, and what I got was like black and black and black, whatever. Not fated to see auroras. Any other final thoughts? Okay, I'll see you next time with Robinson Jeffers. Okay, thanks, guys. Have a good couple days. Take care.